attention all of the time. The whole global warming and the climate change is happening all over. We see in Greece, almost destroyed by fire. Other countries in Europe, extreme heat and fire. Other countries flooding, more water that they can deal with. And then recently hurricanes kicking off in the Caribbean and rushing through Florida, I think doing more damage than they've had done for over 100 years. So definitely, you know, a big issue that we still got to keep putting our attention, and we're so glad we've got so many activists who are concerned about climate change and taking action to do something about it. And then, of course, the Lula is back on the scene and making great attempts at rescuing the Amazon region. And indigenous rights people have been up in arms, however, because some of the Bolsonaro crew are still in control of some of the levers of government and of power around the Amazon region. And it's still an ongoing battle. So we're really pleased that, Jackie, I think you've probably seen it. And I think we've definitely been encouraging activism really around the weather and the climate change, and we will continue to do that. We also see in Africa, and we'll hear some more about Africa from Frank a bit later on. We see the changes that are happening. It feels like finally, you know, people are on the move and looking to kick the imperialists off the continent, which can only be a good thing for the whole world, really. More fairness and justice reigning throughout. The other issue that's been really at the forefront, and we've probably seen more news on reparations for slavery in this last year than we've seen for 20 years. Most mainstream papers and news channels are carrying something. A lot of it fueled actually by some reparations that are being made from governments, from some institutions, some individuals. We see the heirs of slavery grabbing the attention in many ways. Just recently, some of you might have seen going to Guyana to make apology and to make reparations of some kind. And somebody's trying to call me again. Sorry. Let me just switch off that one. Sorry, somebody's trying to get me. Yes, so we see that there's a lot of publicity there, but I think, you know, all of it not good in the sense that I notice people just decide, and institutions decide how much they're paying, when and who to, and how it's to be spent and the rest of it, which is not the way in which, you know, I envisage, you know, not only CARICOM and the people who are fighting for reparations, that we at the table, we have a say in what's happening here. So there's there's still a lot of work for us to be done, but it's good that the publicity is there, that people are taking some action. It could only push us in the right direction of forcing, which for me is one of the main things that we need to do, is to force this apology from the British government and also reparations. So far, we know there's been huge opposition to it, you know, starting with Tony Blair, who has lots of regrets and so on, and sorrows, but no apology, and actually tried to scupper any kind of discussion on reparations at the UN conference on racism. You know, since then, we've had Cameron, you know, going to the Caribbean and promising jails and promising boxing rings and so on for the Jamaican people, but felt it's time to move on. You know, we should forget about reparations and just move on. And recently also Boris Johnson almost telling off the king for even mentioning the word slavery, you know, don't open up this can of worms. And of course, this unelected prime minister that we've got at the moment is saying, you know, they'll be making no apology, and, you know, we need to forget and move on in similar fashion to the others. So we know we've got a challenge with the British government. Although the UN, a senior judge has said, they have a case to answer, they need to sit down and talk with us. So we keep up the pressure. We know that in doing that, we will have to be mobilizing in the UK and mobilizing with the working classes to actually be pushing for that change to happen as well. Whenever I'm speaking, I'm reminding people that, one of the biggest movements this country ever had was the anti-slavery movement. So we need to rebuild and to keep working at making those changes. The other big event that was happening, in my opinion, is the whole BRICS conference that was happening, where China and Russia and Venezuela and Brazil, Iran, India, some major players who are sitting down to look at the way the whole global economy is dominated by the dollar and what they can do to make some changes in the way things are structured. So significant developments happening over the holiday period here, really. So I'm sure there's a lot more people might want to mention on that, but we need to press on because of time. Now, we've got a really good program on today because one of our supporter members has been under attack, and you might have seen her name in the press quite a bit, almost for one period on a daily basis. Her name is mentioned either directly or indirectly. Even the, past Attorney General, I think of Tony Blair's government, has commented on, and other people have made some comment about what's happening there. But I won't say much on that because I've asked Nadine to be ready to introduce this issue and to take the lead on presenting what is being going on as regards lawyers, so-called lefty lawyers who are trying to fight for justice to the underprivileged in this country. Nadine, if you take the floor.
Thanks, Luke. I'm just going to do a short introduction and then pass over to Jackie, because I thought it was important for us to put this into context, because lawyers who defend human rights of others have become increasingly vulnerable because politicians no longer respecting their rights or protecting them. Now, it's unfashionable to talk about our UK unwritten constitution, but lawyers, even lefty lawyers, have long seen the separation of powers between government, the elected parliament, and judiciary and lawyers as a very important thing. But increasingly, it's been torn up by successive governments, particularly this one. And as part of tearing that up, they've had to attack a constituent part, which is the lawyers and the judges. And so we see from Brexit onwards an increasing attack on judges and lawyers. And if we think back to the Daily Mail on the 4th of November 2016, which had a front page, enemies of the people, and then 3 prominent judges who were enemies because they'd had the temerity to say that UK government, the executive part of our government, needs the consent of Parliament to give notice of Brexit. Now, I know one of those judges, and he was really scared by being targeted in that way. And of course, tribunal judges, and I was one of these tribunal judges in immigration, we quite often found that if we allowed a deportation case, that case would be leaked to the Sun or the Mail or the Express, and we'd see our names in print. And then some of us got doorstepped. But more importantly, really, than our individual attacks, is it did have a chilling effect on other judges. I saw some Liberal judges being very worried about allowing deportation appeals because they thought they may end up in the Sun or the Express. And one of the effects is that it increasingly puts real pressure on the existing Liberal lefty judges and lawyers when they try and make decisions which are both moral and legal. And what we found recently is that particularly with Swella Braverman, that she's used the mainstream media to have a pretty continued attack on lefty human rights lawyers such as Jackie. And they do so by having a false narrative. The one is that these lefty lawyers provide false narratives to their clients of past persecution, that all the people trying to enter in small boats are actually bogus asylum seekers. The reality is that a staggering 76% of those entering at the moment are granted asylum if their claims are looked at, because the vast majority from Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, elsewhere in the world, where undoubtedly they're at risk. And thirdly, the other part is it's these people who are depriving Indigenous English people of housing and services, because there's so many of them coming in. But when you actually unpack the figures, there is a backlog of a staggering 175,000 undetermined asylum claims. But if those claims were to be determined, and 76% of those claims would succeed, those people would be able to support themselves through work. They would be refugees. They would be no longer looking for housing or support from the government. So the fact that those aren't being determined is a cause of the use of hotels, of the rocketing bills. But the Home Office is doing nothing really to bring that backlog down. Instead, it's been advertising. If you look on the Home Office at the moment, they're advertising for new, they're not even caseworkers now, they're asylum assistants. They're advertising for people who are now working retail and customer care to look at asylum claims. Asylum claims are incredibly evidence heavy and complex, and you need trained and experienced people to ever determine properly and get through that backlog, but they're not being employed. The only reason the backlog is going down a little bit is that they've done a deal with Albania to return Albanian applicants on the basis there is no persecution or danger in Albania, despite the fact that thousands of people are at risk from human trafficking, and particularly women and children. Now, the second proposition I was interested in was the fact that the people who are being, the lawyers who are particularly being targeted by this government are largely from the communities who are producing migrants. They're Black or other minorities. And I'll just give a couple of examples. There are many others. So on the 3rd of September 2020, Priti Patel, then Home Secretary, claimed that activist lawyers were frustrating the removal of migrants, a claim which is made pretty consistently by this government. A few days later, on the 7th September 2020, a right-wing activist brandishing a long knife entered Duncan Lewis offices in Harrow, a large migrant practice, and demanded to see a named immigration officer who was Black. His intention was to abduct him. And when the lawyer did not come down, he then assaulted the receptionist, who was also Black. The man doing the attack blamed the lawyers for preventing removal of immigrants from England. He was charged, he was arrested, and he was charged with racially and or religiously motivated attacks on those two people, as well as a number of other offences. And then we have Jackie's case. And Jackie's case I find interesting because they were accusing her of representing lots of people in the Rwanda cases, but actually Jackie tells me she's only really ever represented one person. There were a lot of white lawyers at prominent chambers they could have picked on who consistently represented the people on the Rwanda flights, but for some reason they chose not to. And I think alongside the attacks on migrant lawyers as implicit attack on migrants themselves. So it suits them to attack migrant lawyers. Now, of course, this attack on lawyers has happened in the UK in the recent past. I'm just going to mention two lawyers from Northern Ireland, because the lead up to their, in fact, murders was similar. In January 1989, the junior minister in the Home Office, Douglas Hogg, told Parliament there were a number of lawyers who were unduly sympathetic to the IRA. One of the lawyers that was implicitly mentioned was Pat Finucane, a solicitor who defended a number of Irish Republicans. Shortly afterwards, on the 12th of February 1989, he was murdered by lawyers paramilitaries with the collusion of security services. A few years later, another lawyer, Rosemary Nelson, who wasn't a defense lawyer in a criminal sense, but who had taken a number of cases against the unionist community on various issues, was assassinated with a car bomb outside her house. That was in 1999. In both cases, they charged loyalist paramilitaries, but the lead up really was the accusation against those lawyers that they were partial. They were from the Republican community, they were from the Catholic community. And in both cases, subsequent inquiries found collusion. The third thing I'm going to mention briefly is that it appears that some people one would have expected to support Jackie have not made themselves visible. In both the Duncan Lewis and Jackie's case, the Law Society and the Bar Council came out very strongly in favour of them and accused the government of putting them at risk, which in a way shows how much the legal profession understands the risk they're now at, because the Law Society and the Bar Council are usually pretty conservative bodies. But they've been very strong in Jackie's defence because they do understand what is happening in terms of attacks on that part of our so-called constitution. And lots of other law firms, my own Legal Workers Union branch, various NGOs also came out and supported Jackie. But what was very noticeable, the persons who did not support her publicly were the Labour Party and Keir Starmer, himself an ex-lawyer. This is very surprising because actually the reason Jackie got in the dossier and got in the papers was because the dossier was entitled "Reveals Senior Labour Advisor is Left Lawyer Blocking Rwanda Deportation." And it was implicitly an attack on the Labour Party and Keir. But there has been no public statements in any sort by Keir or the Shadow Attorney General or the Shadow Home Secretary, which in my view is chilling because you wonder what they would do if it happens on their watch. The one person, and this is, I think, no coincidence, who has come out in support of her, who has some connection with the Labour Party, is Martin Ford Casey, who is the Black lawyer who was asked to look into what was happening at the headquarters, Labour Party headquarters, in Jeremy Corbyn's time about anti-Semitism, and who found there was a hierarchy of racism happening, and who has since then been trying to get the Labour Party to address Black racism. And I'll leave my last words to him. So what he said was, many lawyers have expressed disappointment to him that Keir Starmer, as a lawyer, has yet to make a statement defending Jackie. The lawyers have also expressed bewilderment. There hasn't been a strong statement from the Labour Party about the attacks on her. Thanks, Luke. And I'm going to hand over to Jackie.
Thank you so much, Nadine, for presenting that. And when we consider that, how many people in other parts of the world still hold out and still think that about British justice being the best in the world, something that's been drilled into us, certainly for me, coming from the Caribbean. And most people still hold on to that idea that somehow Britain is a fair country, will do right things. And this is despite all that we know about the amount of carriages of misjustice we experience in this country. We only have to look back to the Guildford 4, the Birmingham 6, and even just recently in the press about a man serving 17 years in prison for a rape he did not commit, despite all his protestations and all the evidence that actually pointed to him not being the rapist because of the corruption in the police system and the justice system. This man served 17 years in prison. So we need to keep exposing. And clearly one of the things that's happening here is, self-censorship is the best way to regulate us and to control us if we can do that self-regulation ourselves. So, and we have put in fear into people protesting and rowing. And I need to remind people as well about the way in which they're also trying to stifle protest in this country, that, you can protest, but don't make noise, don't stop traffic, don't disturb your neighbors. What kind of protest is that? If we don't keep fighting for our rights in this country, we will be absolutely crushed. So, and we know there's danger. We've seen, some politicians being killed. We know of the Labour MP who was murdered. So we need to take these threats very seriously. We are prepared as CLS to defend our people at all times and be out there in the streets and protesting in any ways we can. And we know there's a measure of risk involved. Jackie will respond in a minute. And usually at our meetings, we leave chance for questions and answers and so on. But I know, Jackie, you've got to get away to another engagement. So if you feel you want to leave the meeting after speaking, that's absolutely okay. We will look at we can respond to questions and answers. So with that, I'll ask you to now take the floor. Jackie.
Thank you very much, Luke.
You're still, yeah.
Thank you.
By the way, you might not have noticed you're listed as Nadine Finch. I think your caption on the screen.
Oh, that's really weird. I don't know. I have no idea because I've just linked it.
Because you had a link. The link was sent to you from Nadine's.
Oh, Nadine's, but it should still show up as what I'm on my laptop. But anyway, I have no idea. Thank you, Luke. I can stay on for a little bit. But yes, I do have to go on to something else. And thank you, Nadine. I think in many ways, Nadine has encapsulated much of what I was going to say anyway. So perhaps I'll just tell you a little bit about, maybe some of the personal things and how this all came about. So on the 5th of August, I noticed that I was followed by two journalists. One was called Kate Ferguson from The Sun on Sunday, and the other one was called Claire Ellicott from The Mail on Sunday. And I thought it was odd because they were virtually within a minute of each other. And, I thought something might be afoot, but I thought it might be something to do with Windrush because that's the thing that I'm mostly working on. And then one of them then said, after I'd followed them back, that they'd had a dossier, which is why we're using the term dossier, but it is really just 4 pages. And I know some of you have seen it, but it is just simply 4 pages. I suspect what happened is that those journalists were sent a dossier of other things. So they would have been in a whole document of other people and other things. And there were the 4 pages on me. And said that they were going to do a story in the Sunday versions of their papers, because this was the Saturday morning, and that it was about me stopping the boats, or allowing the boats in, rather, stopping Rwanda, and also, what was the other thing, grounding deport flights. And they also mentioned that I was a very good or very close friend of Keir Starmer. So it then became very clear what was going on. And by the afternoon, I then heard from Dominic Pina of The Telegraph and Jonathan Walker of The Express, virtually saying the same thing. So all four of them were going to do pretty much the same story. They all mentioned this dossier. So I'm supposing that Suella Braverman's office called it that. And two of them, one I think inadvertently, actually linked it to the email. And I think one deliberately did so because it actually said, we've got this dossier that's attached. So I think that that must have meant that they wanted me to have it. But another one, I think, had just sent me a long chain of emails between them and others. And if I went right down to the bottom, there was the same document. So I don't think that that person meant for me to have it. But it's 4 pages of absolute nonsense. Really, it goes back to the 1980s, references me speaking at a CLS meeting, says that I was a member of the Marxist New Deal movement. I think it has me down as the general secretary. Well, I wish. But, you know, it's just full of inaccuracies. I would have been very proud of that. It does actually go on about me and Rwanda and Kiir and all of that sort of stuff. And I think the purpose of it really was that somebody in, well, we now know who, because we've also had information leaked from within what is now called Conservative Campaign headquarters. So we now know who's behind it all. But I think they were asked to find somebody who they, you know, that sort of Venn diagram thing you did at school, where you've got Keir Starmer's name and then small boats, Bibi Stockholm, Rwanda, deportation. Who could you find who's involved in those things that you could also link to Keir? Because it was going to be Small Boats Week, as you know, and they wanted to do as much damage to Labour as possible. And somehow in their digging around, they found me. And I was purposeful or useful in many ways. One, because I do have some kind of role in all of those things. And I am involved in the task force that Labour has set up to look at. In fact, we're drafting a white paper looking at possibly having a new piece of legislation around race equality. And at the moment, the discussions are whether that goes into the manifesto. And effectively, what we've been doing in that task force, and it's a right old mixed bag of people who've been called together. It's chaired by Baroness Doreen Lawrence. The main administrator or the sort of the main drive behind it is Annalise Dodds, MP, in her role as Shadow Minister for Equalities. And we're looking at what are the racial disparities across society in a number of things. So education, health, so in education, looking at things like school exclusions, a disproportionate number of them. In health, looking at various reports that have come out around the disproportionate impact on COVID on Black and ethnic minority communities, looking at why is it that Black women have higher fatalities in maternity care, that sort of thing. So that's the, you know, we are looking at immigration, and I've particularly been trying to push around deportation. I'm particularly concerned that people who were born in the UK and have lived or were brought here at a very early age can be deported to countries often that, you know, these are countries that they have no memory of or no knowledge of if they were born here, because being born here doesn't automatically make you British anymore as of the 1st of January 1983, British Nationality Act. So there are all sorts of problems, and I've been pushing on that. I've been pushing for significant changes on the Windrush schemes, and also we've been looking at asylum. Just as an aside, the only thing that's really taken off there is Windrush, and Labour's not very keen to address anything on deportations, and their main policy plank on asylum is likely to be that we're going to stop the smugglers. So it's not very radical in any way, and it's almost like banging your head against, you know, something or the other. It's not been great, but nevertheless, I'm round that table. and I'm pushing for some changes, and there are some people who are there who are also pushing for these changes. So I think it was just fortuitous that they were able to find me and then link me to Labour and Keir, but it was wrong, because Keir isn't anything to do with this commission. Of course, he's the leader, but he isn't at all involved in this. I don't know how much he buys into any of it. He's not attended anything. There's been loads of MPs and shadow cabinet members attending various forums and stakeholder sessions. I've not seen him. And I don't know him at all. I've only ever met him very briefly at in conversation event that was done very, very recently to celebrate, or to celebrate is the wrong word, to mark the anniversary of the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And it was an in conversation between him and Baroness Lawrence, and I was in the audience. And afterwards, I was introduced to him, and, you know, it was about less than a minute conversation. And I was at some Labour fundraising event not so long ago, and he was present, and I don't think we actually spoke. So he isn't somebody I know. He's certainly not a friend. And when I told all the journalists that, you know, and I say that as a friend, he's not an enemy, but he isn't somebody in my circle. I told them all of that. I told them I'm not a hired worker, because that was their narrative, that I was a senior advisor, not that I'm a volunteer on this task force. You know, we don't even get a cup of tea when we go to these meetings. You know, we're certainly not paid. Poor old Annalise is usually sending her aides down the corridor of Portcullis House to find opened bottles of water for us. So you know, we exist in, you know, quite dire circumstances, and we're all giving up our time, which most of us don't have to be there, because we think this is quite important. So I'm not a hired advisor. Keir's not really involved, and I'm not close to him. And I told the journalists all of that, and they weren't prepared to listen. They had all of that in writing before they went to press. The other reason why I think central office or Conservative campaign headquarters couldn't believe their luck, because I'm Black. And, you know, interestingly, and Nadine alluded to this, you know, when I first wanted to do immigration law, a lot of colleagues said to me, don't do immigration law. You know, it's the kind of area that all Black people go into, and, you know, you'll be typecast and so on. And I went into it. I kind of believed that, to be honest, but ended up with some of the Rwanda cases of the women who were airlifted from a refugee camp who'd all been raped and so on. And that was the end. For me, that was the beginning. I just thought, my goodness me, I hadn't realized that I'm not going to be sitting around doing visa applications, but I am going to be making decisions and doing work that really does impact on people's lives. And that's why I ignored the advice and got into it. But at my level of practice, and I say my level of practice because I do take cases now to Europe, I have cases in the Court of Appeal, there aren't many Black lawyers, particularly at the solicitors level, at all. And in fact, in Rwanda, there are about 100 lawyers and NGO chiefs involved in Rwanda. And apart from two, Sonali Naik, KC of Garden Court Chambers, and Tufik Hussein of Duncan Lewis, there's me. And everybody else, and I was in court for the handing down, and I saw, and I know everybody, we do meet, we caucus, is white. And so I think that it was very interesting that they had me in the center of this story, particularly as Nadine said, I'm not even involved in the main Rwanda case, the main Rwanda JR challenge. Now, my firm is, Lead A is, and interestingly, the team that's involved in that are 5 white women, but they picked on me. Now, my only involvement in Rwanda was very late at night when 7 men were actually sat in a van on the tarmac, ready to be flown out to Rwanda before courts in the UK. So it wasn't all Europe, it wasn't all the European Court of Human Rights. Some of it was in the UK. And remember about Rwanda, there were over 100 people listed for that flight. And lawyers up and down the country were able to make significant representations to get the Home Office itself to stay some of those removals. Yet for some reason, it's all being blamed on Europe because that rings out well in certain parts of society, and it's all being based on these, or, you know, lefty lawyers like myself. But my client had been deemed to be a victim of torture by a detention center doctor. And anybody who practices in this area will know how, and Nadine will certainly know how rare this is, you know, because to me, I'm always convinced they're on the side of the Home Office. You know, you tell them this person's unfit to fly, look at the medical evidence, and they're still saying, no, they're certified fit to fly. In this occasion, their own doctors said, no, this man cannot fly. His skin, his body, his mental state, he clearly is a victim of torture. And so we were able to get a stay in the UK. Didn't have to go anywhere near Europe in that case. That was 1 o'clock in the morning when the flight was still, the plane was on the tarmac. The men were still in the van, and he was handcuffed and had leg shackles on. And, you know, the most awful, drastic thing that you can ever imagine that our government could be responsible for. He was obviously taken off the van and sent back to Immigration Detention Center until we were able to get him out on bail a few days later, and is now going through the process for being recognized as somebody who is a victim of trafficking. He was the other thing that the dossier tried to make out is I only ever represented Jamaican gangsters. Well, this man was an Iraqi Kurdish man. So, you know, and that was part of their whole racist pejorative. But anyway, and so that's my only case, you know, stopped here in the UK, and a man that a Home Office doctor had declared unfit to travel, or unfit to fly. And as you know, the others were stopped with a variety, 1 in the Court of Appeal and 5 with the Rule 39s in the European Court of Human Rights. But using Europe, just saying Europe, in the journalism or in the Home Office's language brings in Brexit and frightens people. People don't realize that that court isn't anything to do with the EU, that the convention is outside there, you know, but it conflates in people's minds. And if you're not prepared to do any real work, then you've got them, haven't you? You've got them that, oh, Europe, stop these people from going. So, so that was what has happened. It has been pretty awful in one sense, because I have to adjust to all sorts of security challenges. And, you know, I've had to have briefings and the police are involved, and we are trying to bring a complaint against the Home Secretary who ordered this. We now know for a fact and have named individuals. We are trying to bring an action against them for inciting racial hatred. They knew what the consequences were. Nadine touched on the Duncan Lewis case. Well, it was worse than that. Tawfiq Hussein, who is a dear friend of mine, and we've been speaking daily since this attack on me, the media attack, he was physically stabbed, and there is an attempted murder trial listed for next April in his case. So this is serious stuff. And of course, there are all the cases that both Luke and Nadine touched on with MPs and lawyers. But, you know, it was Small Boats Week. We had the idea that people were going to be put on Bibi Stockholm, you know, the barge. Of course, that failed. We see that the polls have shown, both Delta and Opinion, that the Tories have gone down 4 points since Small Boats Week. God knows what they will have gone down this week after, because last week was Schools Week, and then we've got crumbling schools. So it would be interesting to see what Delta and Opinion show next week. But it's desperation, despite the fact, and I am going to wrap up in a bit, but despite the fact that the Oxford Migration Observatory and Delta and Opinion and other pollsters, including pollsters on the right, show that immigration is no longer in the top 5 things that people are mostly concerned with when we have, you know, problems with the environment, fuel bills, food bills, housing cost, etc. It has gone right down, yet this government will continue to fight the next election on the basis of immigrations, because they have the visuals of the small boats, and that, you know, they can use that to their advantage. And of course, the European Court of Human Rights coming out of it, coming out of the convention, will be part of its election campaign in order to rile up its base. But, you know, we have a responsibility where we can to present the facts. I mean, we know that there are 110 million displaced people around the world, half of them internally displaced. We also see that most asylum seekers, of which of that number, about half of them are deemed to be either asylum seekers or people granted refugee status, are going to countries that are far less wealthier than the UK. So even Colombia has taken, because of the US actions and sanctions on Venezuela and people leaving not because they want to, but because they have to, we've seen 2 million Venezuelans go to Colombia. We've even seen 300,000 Venezuelans go to Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago's population is just over 1 million. Poland has taken 2 million Ukrainians. There are 1 million Rohingyas in Bangladesh. Yet we believe we have a problem with 45,000 people crossing over in boats. Well, we don't. And the fact that we have these huge labour vacancies of about 1.5 million, so these are people we need, whilst we're demonizing people coming over in the small boats because of the lack of safe routes and alternatives for them. Remember, of the 45,000 that came last year, over 11,000 were from Afghanistan. That's because the Arab scheme is mostly closed, and the Afghan citizens resettlement scheme, which is only if you discount the people who came in Operation Pitting, which shouldn't have been counted in that data anyway, has only brought in 55 people. We are getting calls daily from people stuck in Afghanistan or on the borders up north, you know, all the countries that end in Stan, or on the Iran-Pakistan border. Of course, we can't advise them because the law prohibits us from doing that, but it's a real problem. And so, of course, people are being forced into these boats. And of course, they're not going to be deemed inadmissible. We are not going to be sending people back to Afghanistan, and unlikely that we'll send people back to Syria, Iran, Iraq, Eritrea, and much of the Horn of Africa that's about to explode because of Western involvement there. So, you know, we have to be prepared. I think the left sometimes, and I think that's why, and I don't know how left the current Labour is, but even under more radical leadership, we do not see that standing up for migrants in the way we would expect to see it. I've been writing quite a lot recently, and I was looking for references to Jeremy Corbyn and Windrush. And Windrush is something that very, very few people have an issue with. You know, it's the one thing that people think, oh, well, okay, well, they're all right, you know, because they came and they were called and all that sort of nonsense narrative and so on. So the Daily Mail headlines, the Sun headlines and so forth are quite positive about the Windrush, but I couldn't find much at all. I really couldn't find much. And it's almost as though we can't get the left to engage on this issue, but the data's there. It's an absolute nonsense, and we have to be prepared to stand up for desperate people. Nadine said, you know, 70% of people go on to get asylum. And that's huge amounts. Nearly everyone I've ever dealt with claiming asylum has gone on to get it. And, you know, people are fleeing for genuine reasons, and they may not always neatly tick the Refugee Convention criteria, because I think that criteria itself probably needs some looking at, but they all are fleeing something pretty dreadful. And we are a country that can not only afford to accommodate them, because we get hardly anybody. I mean, France gets 3 times as many people as we do, or takes 3 times as many, and Germany 4 times as many. So it's all an utter nonsense. But you know, the backlog, I think, is deliberate because it gives them a story. You know, the boats, they love the boats because it gives them the visual of the story. Look how dreadful this is. Those hotels, one of the hotels that houses asylum seekers is a hotel that I've had a lot of involvement with through European sporting activities through one of my children. And I can, you know, so I used to be involved in partially booking some of those rooms, and they used to be £40 a night. It's a sort of backpacker place. All of a sudden, the Home Office has entered into an arrangement with this hotel, £250 per night per person, and there's some allegation as to who the owners are. Now, I can't really say because we've been digging and we can't find the evidence of it, but we think the owners may have a family relationship to a former Home Secretary. We're still looking into this. So this profiteering and doing these inflationary deals, again, gives this horrible opportunity to give this story 6 million a day. Well, even if it's 1 million a day, if you were to process the claims more speedily, and if you were to just process those that you're definitely not, so long as you know someone's from Afghanistan, just deal with it. You could deal with them in a day. Then people wouldn't need to be staying in those very expensive hotels, because I've not met an asylum seeker yet, and certainly not somebody granted refugee status, who doesn't want to make their way in this society and contribute back to it. They want to work, go find their own accommodation, choose where they want to live in centers of influence that have their faith organizations, their cultural organizations, family members that are already here. That's how it works. And we have got to contribute to that debate and provide the accuracy of the information, because I don't think the government's winning. I think the attack on me is spectacularly backfired. I think that's just the last thing I'll say. I mean, the fact that the Law Society and the Bar Council came together and did a statement and actually named me, because they have been very good in talking about the rule of law and also condemning the attack on lawyers going back to 2020. It was unprecedented that they thought this is a step too far, and they named me. And lots of law firms. I mean, our office foyer has been full of flowers. I've even had somebody who said that they were a Conservative voter up until now, and they wanted me to have that week's pension to treat myself. Well, we had to tell them no. But I don't want to be struck off in the middle of this. I think Suella Braverman's doing enough to get me struck off by accusing me of not being loyally, but being campaigny. But anyway, now CARICOM leaders, I understand, are going to be doing something. The Commonwealth Law Association I'm a member of, the Eastern Caribbean Bar Association, which I'm a member of, they are all producing statements. And, it has been overwhelming, the support. Of course, it has brought the racism, the racist attacks, some of it coming in direct to my inbox at Lido, some of it under tweets from people on Twitter. Unprecedented, because Twitter doesn't ban anybody. You can use the N-word, you can do what you like because it's free speech, but I've actually had 6 people banned. So that's to tell you how awful. I've been threatened with rape, and one person keeps sending me the cutthroat emoji. I've been told I'm an N-lover. I'm the one responsible for bringing everybody over to this country, and why don't I go back to my own, and all that sort of thing. So some of it's low level, but some of it's quite serious. A couple of people have been identified, and the police are taking them very serious. So it's been ghastly on that front. But the solidarity, I saw that Caribbean Labour Solidarity did something, so I'm really grateful to you. In fact, Caribbean Labour Solidarity was the first organisation I joined when I returned to live in England in 1981. I think I joined it very early in 1982. So that's a 40-year relationship. And, I'm really proud. I'm really sorry that you got caught up in the dossier, but I'm really proud to have had that very, very long association with you. There will be more attacks. We've got to be vigilant. But in my case, I won't be cowed and I won't bow. And I'm hoping none of us will. We have to increase solidarity amongst ourselves, and we must increase the solidarity, the visual and public solidarity that we give to people seeking asylum in this country. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that deserves a show of appreciation. Thank you very much, Jackie, for so eloquently putting that case and for making us aware of this issue and the wider ramifications really around it. And thank you so much for doing this really difficult job and work. And I know you from back in those early days, you just talked about it. For me, I always saw you as the chief cook and bottle washer. You were so influential within what CLS was doing. And we miss you very much in the organization. But we know you're out there. We can count on your support, and we want you to know that we've got your back. We'll back you in anything that you want to do. Just let us know, and we will make sure we can, within our scope, we will do what we can to support your work and to always defend your position and your actions, because we know you're one of us, and whatever you're doing, we support, and we will continue to support you on that.
Thank you.
Now, in presenting the case, I thought would be good for Nadine to have first go at maybe put in a question or comment or anything in that case. But I just wanted to comment as well. That immigration is something that has always happened. There's always been migration. If there's floods, if there's droughts, people move. People move continents. In the past, there was no immigration. There was open borders. People travel. If you're in danger in one area, you move. You go somewhere else. And this fight to hold people back, mainly from events caused by the Western world, whether it's climate change or poverty or the amount of violence that's happening in some of these countries. Much of it is as a result of them being over there through the conquest and colonialism. And we need to keep reminding people, and reminding those governments in some ways that, we're here because you were there. And we claim every right to be here because of the things you've done to our countries and continue to do. We will hear some more on Africa in a little bit, and I'm sure Frank is getting ready for that. And one other point, yes, Nadine, I said I'd give you a shot if you want a question. If people have got comments and questions, please put up your hand. Steve, I'm sure you'll direct me if I don't see them, and let me know who's being there first. Thanks, Nadine.
Yeah, look, it's more really a question, not a question, but a comment to Jackie, because I actually agree with what she's been saying. But she raised the question about the Labour Party, which I would agree with. Islington North Labour Party, which has a bit of a we're still hanging on in there, but we're not representative of the Labour Party. We had a very good refugee session recently, a public meeting. And what was remarkable, in my view, with the number of older Irish people and other migrants who stood up to support asylum seekers. And actually, it was both good and bad, because actually it did indicate that many other people didn't think it was an issue, but it was remarkable how many people who'd come here with legal routes, but had problems, very much felt a sense of respect and also necessity to support asylum seekers. And we are trying to put what is quite a hard-hitting motion to Labour Party conference. I don't have a lot of hope that it will get onto the agenda, but we are discussing it this week, and a lot of our wards are going to support it, I think. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for that. Great. Okay. Questions. Are there any questions?
There's one.
Jackie, when you okay. Jackie, there's one question actually that crossed my mind when you said it. I just reminded, I couldn't, I'm not sure if that's still a fact. 1983, you said the law was changed to people born here and you don't get naturally natural citizenship.
Yeah, it's the Nationality Act of 1981. But it came into force on the 1st of January 1983.
Wow. Okay. Okay, Ola. If you can come in with your question.
Thank you, CLS, for putting this on, and thank you, Jackie, for your response. Just a very, I don't know how to put it, but probably a question that let me just go straight to it. Is there not a way of actually taking some kind of libel action against Suella Braverman or the various newspapers for what has been suggested against you? And I'm saying this on the basis that it is clear, looking at what happened with Jeremy Corbyn, if you do not take some kind of aggressive response to these people, you will be hounded and it will continue. And so therefore I'm saying it's all well and good, and we hear what you're saying and doing. And, absolute props for you for standing up and continuing to be yourself. But surely, is there not some way of taking some kind of legal action to pursue this?
Okay.
Because that's the only way they seem to stop. Thank you.
Thanks, Ola. We've got Steve. Steve, you want to comment? Jackie will take 2 questions in a row, and then you'll answer. Steve, you want to comment?
Yeah, just to say that Caribbean Labour Solidarity has been working with the Bangladeshi Workers' Council, the Indian Workers' Association, and Jewish Voice for Labour to start a campaign for a call for a reform of immigration laws. I'm going to put something into the chat, which is a joint statement that the various organisations have agreed. But we felt that as organisations that that represent to a greater or lesser extent immigrants or their descendants, it behoved us to actually start a campaign, but a campaign that would be within the labour and trade union movement for an improvement in matters and this. So anyway, I'll put it in the chat and I'll circulate it afterwards.
Good, thank you, Steve. All right, Jackie, you want to respond?
On Ola's question about legal action, well, there's all sorts of things going on. We've had no end of all the big city law firms who have libel departments volunteering, because they're all quite friendly with the head of my firm, Martin Day. So there are various groups of teams that have been assembled to look at things. One of the issues, or one of the problems with libel, is that there hasn't been, even though they've exaggerated my involvement in things, there hasn't really been any reputational damage. In fact, quite the opposite. It has spectacularly backfired on them. And I do happen to have a contact within the Conservative upper echelons through a parent, children at the same school sort of connection, who tells me that they're absolutely livid, some of them, that they did this because they, it's not worked. And not all of them knew that it was happening. And in fact, the media team didn't know it was happening. So it was directly from Suala's office, from a chap called Jake Ryan, who's her senior advisor. So we haven't really got the reputational damage thing.
That's a shame, Jackie. I'd have thought maybe we're not doing a good enough job at CLS. You would have thought getting your name attached to CLS might bring some.
No, it's incredible. But we are, just to say to Ola, there are teams assembled looking at various things. My key thing is to show that this action has incited racial hatred, and that is something we are putting together our own dossier on. We unfortunately, because I blocked some of the stuff on Twitter, and Twitter has now taken those people off, we've had to go through their legal people to get back some of that evidence. Some of the members of my team have screenshotted some things, but we didn't do it diligently at the beginning when some of the real vile stuff came in. So there's all sorts of discoveries and things that we have to do. But yeah, we are looking at it. Of course, we're not going to let them get away with this. No, but it is difficult to, sometimes it looks as though you've got an obvious case when you haven't.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Jackie. I think we'll end the discussion on this one. And so I know you've got to run away, and you've given us a good chunk of your time. Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'm going to have it on because I'm going to be in the background doing some stuff. So I'd like to listen to Niger. So I'll have it on, and I may pop back in. Great. But I do have to leave in about half an hour. All right. Well, can I just say thank you? Sorry, I've only just seen that there's lots of stuff in the chat, so I'm obviously not going to be able to respond to it all. But thank you, everybody, for all your support. And yeah, long live the struggle.
If you're around, you can. If you're around after the discussion, you might do some closing remarks. I see Frank's hand is coming up very late with a question, so maybe we'll take Frank because he's going to be the next speaker coming up. We'll take your question now, Frank.
Yeah, it wasn't actually a question. I had a question I wanted to ask, but I didn't. But that was I was just clapping Jackie's contribution. But was it one hand clap?
Okay.
Yeah, surely, Jackie, there's been a catalogue of misdemeanors of wrongdoings from our Suella Breverman. Surely she can't just keep bundling her away like that around. There must be some way of maybe cataloging these mistakes she's made and bringing a case against her, because it seems like it's not even covert racism. She's really going over the top. Isn't there anything that can be done?
Yeah. Well, she doesn't really discriminate in her horror, does she? She's horrible to everybody. But yeah, but as I said, we're looking at it. You know, I'm trying to keep out of it. I've got teams who are looking at these things. In some ways, better that way, because I don't really want to engage with all the material and so on. I'm very busy. In addition, Windrush is still a nightmare. I've still got quite an enormous amount of work to do on Windrush. I do have a team that deals with run-of-the-mill immigration stuff, like deports and people who are undocumented and asylum. And we just, as of yesterday, got a legal aid contract for asylum, so we'll be doing much more work on asylum. And I've just been given the lead at Lee Day. As you know, Lee Day was instructed by CARICOM 10 years ago, 2013, and I've just been handed the file on reparations and told to lead on it. So God knows I don't really fully know what it's all about at the moment. I'm trying to get to grips with it and reading law going back to the 17th century. So in one sense, Suella Braverman is right down the bottom of my list of priorities. I have a feeling that we won't hear much more about her after the next election. But as I said, there are teams that are looking to see where there's an action to bring.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jackie. That'll be the final word there. Thank you so much again. Thank you very, very much. Okay, at the beginning, I tinted on some of the challenges that were happening over the summer for us. I looked at the weather and around reparations and so on, and I actually forgot to mention two other issues that are up. And one is with Jamaica, and I was hoping Paul might be here, but he did say is Paul a UN? Paul, I don't think Paul is here. But in Jamaica, they're obviously having some problems with teachers recruitment at the moment. Well, not so much with recruitment, but with loss of the teachers being recruited by the United States, mainly. Carolina, I think, is the state that is mostly seemingly targeting Jamaican teachers. Some 450 to over 1,000 that might be migrating or leaving the jobs, leaving Jamaican schools in some bit of a bother at the moment. And it's just reminiscent really of the brain drain that is, and skills drain that has been going on for generations, not only from the Caribbean, but from all poor countries, you know, as teachers, nurses, doctors, anybody with any skills who can earn far way more than they earn in their countries are leaving. And we think it's a real shame, and we need to make sure that our skilled workers and our professionals in the region are treated better with better conditions of pay and work, that they're not tempted to leave just for a few dollars more, as it were. Yes, I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. And of course, the other issue that's there that, seems at this point to be unresolvable is Haiti. Just so much killings and hardship that's going on, including the weather adding to it, climate change adding to the woes of Haiti yet again. We continue to try and think our way through it as to what was the best way we can support the Haitian people in the really tough times that they are going through. We had come to a position at one point that no intervention is probably the best position to take up. And it's probably one we're still holding on to, especially when they're talking of sending of troops from Kenya with a nasty reputation, really, to go to work to bring any justice in Haiti. Is a frightening situation, and the CARICOM seems to be back in that proposition. And they need to be reminded, in some ways that the killings that recently happened in Saudi Arabia with the troops massacring, people from Yemen trying to cross the borders, trained by American and by Germans, military. So there's much, we have no confidence whatsoever in Kenyan troops going to Haiti, or any troops for that matter. But we continue to think about this issue and see if we can find ways in which we can assist Haiti really to come in to a place where they can at least start to set and train the kind of systems that will make lives better for them. It's especially important for us because, it's the first free republic really of Black people. We know they've been targeted to not succeed. The pressures are there from the European powers that are determined that they'll never be seen as a success. And we need to find ways to make sure that they are a success. And with that, I'll ask Frank to come in and take the table to tell us what's been going on and all these coups and so on that's happening in Africa at the moment. And the most recent one was Niger, and then I think was Gabon to follow up. So Frank, if you're ready for the floor, it's yours.
Yes, thank you, Luke. It's strange that you should have ended off with Haiti there, and also the narrative you use, the coups you keep calling them. But if you see what's actually happening there, I think these are revolutions, because there's some drastic change they're trying to make within those countries, right? So I think we should start saying the revolutions, instead of jumping in and saying the coups. And you can see from one of there is this agreement against to reintroduce colonization, right? There's 10 agreements that were signed by most of these French colonies, right? That really, I think people had to be, on drugs to actually sign these agreements, and they are so strange that I can't, it's like me and Suella Bever. I can't understand what she's doing, and I can't understand what these guys were doing signing these agreements. And it ties the whole these revolutions that has been happening over the last few months. It ties it all together. When you find, again, people in France, people in the small boats trying to get to France, and France is kicking them out. And you find that the riot we recently had in France was one of these people's children or child was killed in France. So they've got to do something to change this situation. And I think they've all taken it in hand, and now they're doing something about changing the situation. Not only Niger, I think I was told talk about Niger, but it's gone beyond Niger now. You got Mali, you got Togo, you got, and if we wait, I think next week and the week after, we'll be having Cameroon and all the others. They'll be changing over, because now is the time for them to change. It's open knowledge now that there is a change needed. And what I'll do is, like, I'll go through the agreement. There's 11 agreements. It doesn't really take much explanation about these agreements. And you can see the first one really relates to what happened in Haiti, where the French blockaded Haiti and wanted repayment for the structures that they had built while they controlled Haiti. Now, the first one they've got here, the colonial debt, to repay the colonial debt and benefit of colonization. That's the first agreement that these 14 French countries or ex-colonies have signed, right? I don't know, the fact of the matter that, that everything was taken out the country, and it was really similar to some form of slave labor that was going on in the country. The fact that, you know, they controlled, the French controlled everything, and, you know, actually getting their infrastructure built for nearly next to nothing. But because it's in 1960 that they have they agreed to make these colonies independent, they had to first of all pay back for any of the infrastructure of colonization. Somebody signed for that. You know, it's really unthinkable. Now, I don't know where they got the costs from, but somehow or the other, they've got a figure for that. And they want these colonies to start paying back, all 14 of them. The 14, as you may have known, is like Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea. Well, I really think the Guinea is not an aspect of this agreement, right? But there's other agreement that Guinea comes in, because Guinea was, Guinea-Bissau was Portuguese. It wasn't French. And also, as I'm there, I might talk about the Equatorial Guinea, which was Spanish. So about the repayment of colonization, I don't think they'll be in part of that. But there was Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, and Congo Brazzaville, as it says there, and Gabon. Now, they're all part of this agreement, this 11 agreements. The second agreement, which is the automatic confiscation of national financial reserves. Now, this is that the African countries must deposit their financial reserves with the Bank of France. So France is actually guarding their national reserves. Now, if you check, this national reserve of all these 14 countries are now in France. France now uses this reserve to, they do, banking, they would invest this money. Who have the benefit of these investments? It doesn't go back to any of the 14 countries. It's France uses that to invest. But this is one of the things. It also goes on to say that these countries must invest 65% of their foreign exchange reserve into that account. Now, to me, that really doesn't make sense, 65 of that. And then there's a 20% extra that they've got to pay in case there is any financial risk. So that's 85% of the income from this country has to be banked in a French bank, which gets weirder and weirder each day, because, you know, where's the interest on their money to look after their countries? And when you think of like things like the whole of France depending on the uranium from Niger for their lighting system, and when you think that Niger hasn't got any lighting, then you know they haven't got any lighting. Where's the profit from all of these, you know, all the money going? Now, I suppose that's something you got to ask yourself. You've seen why there's dirt streets in Niger and bitumen roads in France. Now, when you see this kind of agreement, you understand why that is happening. Now, the agreement number 3 was the right of first refusal on any raw material resources discovered in the country. That means that, as it says, the French have the first refusal. If you discover something, you've got to ask the French. Now, if you've got someone else who are offering you more money for that, you know, you've got to offer it to France first. And when France says they don't want it, then you're now allowed to look for another partner. Now, who signs this kind of agreement? The agreement 4, priority to French interests and companies and public procurement and public tender. Priority must be given to French interests, and any public procurement or public tender, again, you've got to look to France first. It's just out of this world. And I think this is what's happening. They are changing, trying to change it. That's why I believe it has to be, it's a revolution that's happening, because this is, you know, it needs a total change of system. Agreement number 5, exclusive rights to provide military equipment and train military officers of the colonies. Now that right has to be given to France. Only France can, or you can only use French equipment. Your officers has to be trained. Africans must send their senior officers for training in France and are obliged to provide themselves with military equipment from France. So therefore, this is why they call it the contract for continued colonization. That's what it is. There's number 6, the right for France to deploy troops and intervene militarily in the country to defend its interests. No wonder. If all the interests are French, then, you know, it's your country. You can do what you like. And this is what they're saying. So any defense agreement, anything you want, is like Boko Haram. To try and get rid of Boko Haram, you have to use the French. But what I'm understanding now is when in Niger, they cornered the rebels, and the French told them not to pursue. There is people saying that the Boko Haram is controlled by the French. Probably that is why they didn't want their forces to pursue. All of this is just, it was just quantifying. I think it's meet ahead now, and you know, things had to change. The obligation to make French the official language of the country and the language of education. They've also set up an organization, well, the Francophile, Francophones, you've heard about that. And these organizations have several satellites, but the thing is that the education of all this, these are all controlled by the ministers in France. They're not controlled by any of this group, any of the 14. Everything has to go to France to be okay. It gets worse, because number 8 is the obligation to use the franc as a currency of the 14 countries. Of course, there's two different francs within Africa. There's the Central African franc and the West African franc. But even though they're the same, you can't use that franc if you go to France, because of course now France is using the euro. But France has to provide the monies, etc., for these two blocks to use the franc. So it's really a parasitic relationship that's been going on. Also, the obligation 9, or agreement 9, shouldn't say obligation. Agreement 9 is the obligation to send to France an annual balance sheet and a report of the state of your reserve. No report, no money. Now, the report relies heavily on what feedback you get from France. You're not getting any feedback from France, so therefore you cannot supply your report. So therefore you can't get no money. So your money is being kept in France, which you don't get any report about. So, so no, you can see why there's hardly anything going. It has to be some people, some special people to sign this kind of agreement. That's why these people are now under house arrest. You cannot kill them off because they've got too much money stacked away somewhere. So it has to be, it's some form of peaceful transition. That's why the people are on the streets. The people are fully behind what the military is doing. You know, you can see that this is not coups. These are things that are led to happen. Yes, the renouncement of renounce any military alliances with other countries unless authorized by France. Now, as we saw, one of the leaders of the Niger was sitting down with Putin. Now, under this agreement, that could not happen, right? He cannot ally himself with any other country except France. France can ally you with other countries. That's through the route of France, but not through your direct route. And the obligation to ally with France in the event of war or a global crisis. Now, these countries they've obliged to send troops to help France. If for some reason NATO decide they're going in to help Ukraine, you can well be seeing, or you could have been seeing, Mali or Niger forces fighting with NATO in Ukraine. So you can see that these things could not be allowed to carry on. It's total it's parasitic, you know, and it is, like I say, something that needed to be changed, and hopefully this is what we are seeing being changed. We remember, like when I said Luke talking about Haiti, when France was driven out of Haiti, they came back with their gunships and isolated Haiti and demanded reparations. Actually, they said reparations for the things that they've lost, that infrastructure that they've left, and they demanded millions. I think it was 4 million, which today in today's money for that amount of time it worked out into trillions of pounds of francs. So they've done it once in Haiti, so they think they've done it again with these 11 conditions. They've left themselves forever masters of these 14 countries unless some revolution, and they've installed their puppets who are not looking at these agreements. They were just looking at the money that they were getting into their bank accounts. As you can see, recently there was one minister who was stopped with bagloads of, not francs, dollars, suitcase full of dollars he was trying to get away with. And I'm glad the time is here to really put an end to this mockery that was going on. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Frank.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's about time things started to change in Africa, and the French have been particularly nasty. I think on the continent. You know, when you consider that they also had African troops fighting in the Second World War, and when those troops complained about pay and conditions when they were in their countries, they were actually met with bullets. I think this was in Senegal, if my memory serves me right. And I like your enthusiasm for revolution, but I'd be a little bit more cautious about calling it revolution at the moment, because, you know, we've seen the military take over countries many times, and we see what direction they're heading, usually to the right, and usually bringing more misery and destruction onto the people. I'd like to think that people are waking up on that something more radical is happening now. But I would err on the side of being cautious and watch and see what the guys are up to.
The time for caution is past, Luke. The time for caution is past. When people are on the streets, when people are on the streets burning down French embassies, the people, not the army, are out there. You know, they are the ones. This is why it's a revolution, because it's the people that are driving these things. There's the people who blockading the French barracks now. The French soldiers can't come out the barracks, and there's women barricading the barracks. You know, it's a different story when the people are involved. And this is what it's looking more and more like to me. You know, the soldiers are staying in the background.
We stay hopeful.
We should be encouraging them to get rid of these despots and these, and you change it. To me, what's happening here is a total change of what they've been going through. Sorry, Luke. Yeah.
We got a few hands up, but I like your enthusiasm for the revolution. But as I said, it takes a little time for me for most people to think the revolution is happening. The military has taken us in the wrong direction too many times for me to just decide that this is a revolution. For me, I'd say a coup at the moment. I look to see what the steps they're taking before I could start think there's a revolution happening. Okay, we got a couple of hands. We've got Eddie Bong, your hand was up there first. You want to come in? And then we've got Joseph, and after that, Steve Cushion.
Afternoon, comrades. Fantastic,
Hey.
Frank. Oh, of course. Fantastic, Frank, for the presentation. Thank you so much. That's what I've really wanted to hear, and you've put it in a really concise way, because it beggars belief. I don't know if that's the right phraseology, if that means something inappropriate now, but it's so unbelievable the way that the Francophone countries have carried on for all these years. But my comment is about, not years, decades, but my comment is about the British colonies, inverted commas, and the Caribbean, because what is the difference, in effect, to how the Caribbean so-called Commonwealth has been treated and is continuing to be treated by Britain? When the Queen comes to the Caribbean and the royals, where they're not bringing their money, they're not paying. We're paying. Those islands are paying, and the only thing that they're getting back is the sort of increased tourism revenue attracting, and being in the Commonwealth. As you've noticed, Australia was the first, and now Jamaica and someone else say we're not paying for the Commonwealth Games anymore. What are we getting from it? And you know, I agree with Luke, in fact, about the military involvement of these turnovers, these changes. I do agree that whenever the military takes over, it's got a bittersweet taste. I mean, look at Nigeria, and you got rid of Britain and you introduced a military state, and it's, you know, no development, if any, over I'm nearly 60, and it's 60 years since the Biafran War, and when we fought for independence from Britain. But Shell still runs all the oil fields in Nigeria. You can't fish for your own fish in any of the rivers because they're polluted. You know, the whole of the continent, I think, is still being faced with the continuing colonization, and it is, and it always has been, these despots that have been put into positions not by election, which is the other thing I'm worried about, is that there was a democratically elected leader that's been put in prison now, whether or not we like him, and the fact that he's somebody imposed by the colonizers. But it's a democratic leaders that have been overthrown by the dictatorship in Niger, and so by the military in Niger. And so it was a slip of the tongue, because it can become a dictatorship, because it might seem of the people, but without democracy, it doesn't continue to be of the people. So my question is, what is it that we can do in the Caribbean, because our solidarity is with Caribbean in this group, to break from the British hold? Because even though Barbados has led the way, Britain is still very much involved in Barbados and controlling narrative. And I mean, I would like to say that the Barbados example might have inspired some of these West African countries to take the initiatives that they are doing now, but without a united African union of some sort, all these countries are going to be fighting against the giants as Goliath, fighting against Goliath as David. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think we got a question out of that. Frank, you want to take another question and then try and answer?
That question was
that
question was quite long, and I've written down what some of the answers that she's thinking. And if I get another one on top of that, it will be too long. So I'll start off with that. Now, what's the difference? Now, there are democracy and there's democracy. Now, I don't know if you call what's happening in Nigeria democracy, where you go to bed at night expecting two candidates. One of them supposed to be judge the president, and you wake up and there's someone else. So there's democracy and there's democracy. I've seen democracy where there's a landslide winning of the one party against the other. But then if you go and you look for the ballot boxes, you'll find that they're scattered all over the country, right? So what do? He won a democratic election fraudulently. And that's what's been happening. These guys are being backed by Goliath, as you were saying. Goliath has been pushing them in there. Goliath has their records. Goliath knows why they want them in power, because they can continue the ridiculous thing that's going on. Because most of these countries that you call democratic are being run by despots. So we're there now. What's the difference with the British? I think it's quite similar. The French did it one way, the British done it another way. They sailed off into the sunset and left us behind, right? Yet I've often wondered about, we're talking very much now about reparations. To me, reparations should have been done at independence. We should have got this sorted out at independence, but we weren't. Now you're getting people going there saying, oh, my parents were very bad people and they enslaved people, etc. So I can give you 100,000 back, etc. For you to do certain things. Now, if you reparations, you don't say what you want to do with it. You can't go around telling people. Gladstone has just gone back and he set up this study and that study, etc. We don't want studies. The infrastructure within the countries in the Caribbean have to be paid for. What you should be saying is, or everything, all the land. Sandridge Park is a massive company in Guyana. That should be given over to the people. The lands that they own should be given over to the people, or taken. Not sail off into the sunset and say goodbye. So there's a similarity. But these people, the French or the French colonies has looked at it properly and laid out where they see the problem is. The Caribbean is still to go through that process because they think they've got democracy. With our countries are still being run by the so-called bourgeoisie. It was left in their hands and their family just continue running it. Well, I can't. Well, I'll take another one then now. Okay. I think I've answered some.
Joseph, thank you so much. Joseph, can you come in with your question, and then Steve?
See the button where I need to come in. Yep. I have a problem. Are you hearing me?
Joseph?
Okay, all right.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I can't see the button where I have to unmute myself. Anyway, I want to support most of them. First of all, I want to also thank Jackie. I came in with Nadine, when Nadine, towards the end of Nadine, but I really am impressed with Jackie. I want to, express my solidarity to her. I raised that issue. I raised her issue on the Global African Network a few weeks ago. Anyway, but I want to support Frank and also to say that now in Africa, what is happening, although it can go different ways, it's actually a revolution. The revolution has started. And according to Dr. Arikana and Professor Lumumba, who I was fortunate to be on same to hear live 2 weeks ago, he said they both said, we have to come to understanding and not just take the narrative or being fed to us by the West, but understand the intricacy of what is happening in Africa, except in the case of Gabon, which we should be wary about, because the relationship of the new guy, with the post president, he being the first cousin, and having benefited of it, he has to be cautious, and then his relationship with both France and the United States. But I want to draw attention, and I think one of the first person before me asked, what can we do? And I would say the same thing that that young sister said earlier this year from Haiti. We need to do the work in our home first. We need to ensure that our leaders and ourselves do all that we can do to help ensure that when we're looking out at the international community, we could also give firm suggestion, firm action that is based on knowledge, is based on proper understanding, which most of us don't have. In the case, please forgive me, in the case of the Caribbean, we had to start looking at the French territories in the Caribbean, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and even in French Guyana. Yes, yesterday, a Grenadian friend of mine was telling me he married somebody from California. And he said they were in St. Martin and they were going to St. Martin and he was debarred. His wife is white. In the Caribbean, we having a black man being debarred. We have to think about that. We also have to be aware of what is happening in Bonaire. All of those things, neocolonialism is coming back. As one of our Calypsonians said, they're coming back for 3 more centuries. We said the Calypsonian. So we had to look at that. And I wouldn't be surprised if sooner or later, Guadeloupe and Martinique, even French Guyana, rise up, because the French have fooled people into making them believe that those territories are their overseas department, treating them less than even second class citizens. I go stop here for now and probably come back. But it's a revolution, and we need to see that, as Dr. Arikana and Professor Lumumba say, as our revolution, the revolution of people, like African people and people of African ancestry. Thank you.
Thanks. You want to reply to that, Frank? I don't.
No, there's no need for a reply there.
That wasn't a question, really. Yeah. Okay, we get Steve now. Steve's hand is up there.
Yeah,
Steve?
I mean, my first reaction always to a military coup is that you assume it's some bunch of kind of neo-fascist generals taking over. But then you look at the pictures on the, on what news we get of thousands of ordinary workers, farmers, students supporting this and demanding that the French army go, that the French ambassador be kicked out. There were some wonderful pictures on Al Jazeera of these demonstrations. And while I suppose I'm never one to trust a military officer at all, they have certainly opened up the possibility. They've opened a gap in which the people, the workers, the farmers, the students can actually have that revolution that Frank is talking of. And I mean, the picture that I liked the best from this morning's Al Jazeera news was workers and soldiers holding hands together outside the French base, demanding that the French go. And I think, that's so that space that's been opened up is really important, and that can spread. But I think our job in the imperialist heartland, as it were, is to actually say no intervention. It's a matter for the people of Niger. It's the matter for the people of Burkina Faso. It's the matter for the people of the region to resolve within their own political entities, and not, and so, the fact that you've got people like the president of Nigeria who bleating on about democracy when his own rule is completely illegitimate, and I did find a website this morning of the Socialist Workers League of Nigeria is campaigning and demanding that the Nigerian army stays out of the situation, and that's so that it's for the people of the country itself to resolve the matter. And I think what's happened is a gap has been opened up into which the people themselves can push it forward, possibly further than the generals who started it wanted them to.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
Steve, I do. It is. They are supposed to be sovereign countries, wherever you like. They are sovereign countries, so it's up to them to solve their problems. And I think your direction is right. Help them to do what they're doing. Maybe by supporting the demonstration outside the French embassy as no intervention. And let them solve the problem. And I do like it because I do see in there's a lot of people on the streets. They are this impetus seems to be coming a lot from the people as well. So I think we should allow that to happen. We should say no intervention and allow that to happen and see where it goes.
Okay, thanks. Delhi, you want to come in with your question now?
I think Ola was there, but never mind. Delhi, then Ola.
Thank you very much, Frank. That was really concise and really, really interesting. Just a couple of things. You gave the terms of the independence for several of the African countries, and we all, I suppose, listened to it and we thought how absurd, yes, that anyone would sign those terms. Now, do we have the names of the people who signed the terms for the different countries, and also the names of the people who proposed the terms? And the reason why I ask that is because no one in there, any ordinary person listening to those terms would think it's absurd, whether you're African or whether you're French. And I think, do French people understand the terms on which their government said that they made these countries independent? Yeah. And I'm sure, because what's out of the equation is ordinary people. And the voice of ordinary people in France, probably, if they heard that these are the terms would think this is absurd. Yeah. And also most ordinary, and they'll wonder that why would anyone sign this? Why was it offered in the first place? And why would anyone choose to sign it? What was the motivation behind signing it? And the other question is the ordinary people in these African countries. They would also think, if they had a voice, would say, this is absurd. This is not what we want. Now, how do we, as the CLS, try and facilitate that people, ordinary people hearing what happened? Because it's the first time I've heard that, those 11 things, and I think it's absolutely absurd. And I think most people think it's absurd in this day and age. As they think, yeah, so I suppose the question is, do we have the names of the people who, of each country who signed those terms, and also who proposed them in France? Could we put something together on a website about this and try and draw people to look?
Okay, Frank.
What do you think? Sorry, Frank. Does that?
Yes, thanks. I'm trying to put the question to Frank. I think that's very clear. Just because of time, I'm starting to watch the clock. Frank, you want to come in and?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Who signed and why?
Good. Well, for once, I for the amount of time that Ali Bongo's father was in control, I know he must have been one of the people who signed, because it was this 1960. So he was one of the persons who signed. And you can, just from that example, you see the type of people that signed this, because they were not worried about the people. They are worried about themselves, what they're going to get in the bank out of it. So these things were not signed with people who they know exactly who they were. In fact, if you weren't the type of people that the French or the British or whoever wanted in power, you would be assassinated. You would be killed off, and they'll keep going until they find the person they want. And that's what's been happening at round about those times. It wasn't Dr. Arikana Shiambori, yes, yeah, Dr. Arikana Shiambori, quote. She has been talking about this agreement for years. In fact, it's one of the reasons why she's no longer the AU ambassador. She was kicked out unceremoniously out because she was pointing out these agreements. Now, it's about four or 5 years she's been doing this, right? And I would like to think it's because of her exposing of these agreements that has brought about the situation today, because people know these agreements and know about the facts. She has been constantly telling people about these agreements, about the Francophone, and she's always been, so it is known. It is an agreement that has been signed, and it's out there, and it's been going out there, and I think I have to thank her a lot for pushing it out there, and so that more and more people are understanding what the kind of agreement. Now, if we can, there must be that kind of agreement somewhere within the British colonies, and we've got to try and get that out. And some of the things that we are living under, that we know nothing about, we need to get people to expose those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Frank. I think one of the ways you can probably find out who the signatories are is the time of independence, who was in power, who actually took the country to independence. Probably is a good starting point. We got 2 more questions up, and we got about 8 minutes. So I'll bring in Bola. You father, they'll go just now. I'll come back to you. Let me get Kwabena in, because he hasn't had a word in yet. After Kwabena, we'll have Ola as a last question. Okay, Kwabena. Are you there, Kwabena? Your hands up. Okay, we'll move on to Ola and come back to you if you're not ready or not there. Ola, you want to put your question?
Yeah, two comments and two questions, please. Yeah, I love your enthusiasm and what you're saying in relation to the coups, but to determine at this stage that they are revolutions, I think is a little, you know, it's slicing it, as my younger son would say. The difficulty here for me is that when you look at the different coup leaders and the regimes that they have in place, quite often, especially for instance with the Gabon, you will see that some of these people are actually well connected with America or with France. So much so that we have to be careful to say that these people are going to be the beacons of the new democracy or so-called democracy, which is a language that we have to come to, we know doesn't necessarily determine what we want. So my questions for you, Frank, are basically one, if any, do you think this will have on the different African nations that are getting rid of their despots? And secondly, the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring gave us a situation where we saw a number of states, I think it began with Tunisia, getting into a situation where they got rid of their leaders or misleaders. But then, even if that was organic at that stage, by the time it got down to the third or fourth, there are a number of people who are saying that these were not organic coups or revolutions. These were staged. And so I just want to know what your thoughts are on that. Thank you very much.
Okay. I think maybe by accident, these countries have been like brought together for the fact that Nigeria, as Ecowas said, that they're going to be invading it or sending troops in, automatically galvanize a few of these countries together, Mali, Guinea-Bissau, etc., and Niger, saying that, you know, touch one, touch all kind of thing, right? So there is a connect between those things. The fact that these 14 countries have been led by France for all these years, and you can see that the bottles are tumbling over, right? It's kind of galvanizing or joining these countries together, right? So they'll be looking after each other's going. And to me, again, it's from those countries also is the people-led. To me, it appears to be a people-led revolution, right? Which is what the military is supposed to be, looking after the people. Now, to me, I'm happy to see that, and I would give them the fact that this is a different type of revolution, right? The de-dollarization, this falls directly into that now. They have, if they're going to keep their francophile, their money tied into France, or break that tie, they've got to go somewhere else. They've got to look somewhere. And we know the kind of ties that following the dollar brings about. So there has to be something new there to offer to them. And to me, right at this point in time, there's a BRICS, right? To me, that can only assist what they're trying to do. The Arab Spring was a popular revolution as far as I'm concerned, but it was something that was religious based, and it was easily turned over, because nobody was willing to compromise with each other. you know, and to me, it wasn't really, it was grassroots, but it was being led by people with ulterior motives, I suppose. I haven't really looked into the Arab Spring, but I know it is right now. It is a failure. And I'm just hoping. I'm living in hopes, and I'm happy to see that these countries we've got now, they've got a link, and let's hope that link grows, because we've always talking about Africa uniting, and I think these guys they've been born in unity. So to me, it's a bright future.
Good, thanks. Let's see if Kwabena is there and ready. The question, Kwabena?
I'm hoping I can be heard now.
Yes, you heard.
Yes, we can hear you.
So this is a simple one. I don't really want to make any comments, but just information I've been gleaning over the several weeks. I'd like to know, seeing as there's a UN charter that states that there should be there's a non-interference act, if you like, in terms of the internal affairs of other countries. How comes it is that the Ecowas, the Economic Community of West African States, are seeking to deploy troops into Niger? How is it that they can make that justification when the UN Charter clearly states, which I'm of the understanding Nigeria would have signed up to, subscribed to, most countries? Why is it that they feel that they should now interfere in that? Even if the alleged democratically approved government of Niger has been overthrown, because this has not happened there's another state, I forget the name of it, but it's to do with the Rohingyas, where there's been an overthrow there, but I'm not aware of any power going in there to restore.
The reason why is because Niger is part of Ecowas, and they've signed that to protect each other from this type of happenings. And I suppose at the time it happened, if you had a vote from the Ecowas Council, it would have gone in favor of intervention. But in the meantime, they've got a few more countries that have, from ECOWAS, who will now tip the balance the other way. And it's given people have had a time to look and see what is happening in Niger, and has decided to wait and see rather than rush in like the Americans and the French wanted the Nigerians to do. So they've now peace and what's the word I'm looking for? Caution has prevailed.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that.
I think that is a fantastic word to end on. Caution. I'll start to draw the meeting to a close now, and thank you all for listening in, for coming into CLS. We wouldn't be here without you, and it's really important your participation. Spread the word, let your friends and family know about this meeting so you can join. I'd like to thank the speakers, Nadine for leading off, and Jackie for taking time out of our busy day to really give us some good food for thought, and Frank for really dealing with this topical, difficult issue, and I think it's one that we keep our eyes on. We'll probably come back to it again as we see things are unfolding. Thanks to all the questions that we put out here as well. And on that note, I should say that I've seen Jeremy Corbyn. He owes us a meeting, and we're trying to find a slot and a time when we can do it. So hopefully keep your ear out, keep your ears on the ground, and we should hear something from Jeremy at some point. As you know, CLS, I live in Islington. I'm committed to supporting Jeremy, whatever he does as regards the elections. So we keep our ear on the ground and see where things will go. I have a good rest of the day, and thank you all for coming. And thanks to all the speakers and everybody. Thank you all. Thank you, Steve, for holding things together there too. All right, and we see you guys in October.